I'm sorry, who are you again? That's what Carson asked when Arthur Mason introduced himself during the kickoff meeting for the $495 million integration phase. Not sarcastically, not even rudely, just that oily, faux polite condescension that younger execs use when they think they've spotted a nobody. Like the guy wasn't single handedly keeping half the back end from collapsing under the weight of sloppy updates and ego driven code rewrites. Arthur blinked slowly and reintroduced himself. Systems architecture, legacy integrations, I've been here since version 2.3. Carson's smile tightened. He turned to the room, completely ignoring the outstretched hand. Right. Legacy. Got it. That was the moment I started watching. I've been with this company 11 years. I know who builds and who postures. Arthur builds. Always has. The man documents like a monk and comments every line like it's going before Congress. You could hand a 5-year-old his repo and she'd spin up a secure sandbox in 30 minutes. But to Carson, who wore wireless earbuds in meetings and said things like fail faster, Arthur was just static, clutter, a remnant of some pre-cloud era. And in that moment, I saw Arthur tuck his expression behind a practiced nod, shuffle his notepad, and sit down without another word. Didn't defend himself, didn't argue, just observed. By the way, if you've been listening this far, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and like the video. 97% of people never do, but it really keeps us going, and trust me, you're gonna want to see how this one ends. Back to Arthur. After that meeting, I caught him once in the break room. He was microwaving something depressing, green beans and a turkey patty in a plastic container that looked like it had seen war. I made a joke about how he should apply to Carson's new integration team. He didn't even smile, just looked at me, real calm, and said, I already did, then walked out before the microwave even finished. Turns out Carson didn't just reject Arthur's internal application. He made a show of it, in front of the junior engineers. We need people who think in containers, not COBOL. I heard that secondhand, but knowing Carson, I believe it. He even had the gall to joke, again, in public. I don't care who you are, if you can't pivot, you can't play. I remember that one clearly because I saw Arthur standing 10 feet away, pretending to read the patch notes taped by the printer, not reacting, just listening. That same day, Carson hosted his first re-envisioning architecture workshop in the glass conference room like it was a TED Talk. Brought in consultants who used words like synergy mapping and backwards decoupling. Meanwhile, Arthur was sitting quietly in his cubicle, headset off, eyes scanning something on his secondary monitor. I passed behind him and caught a glimpse of it. Old contract PDFs, dated back to 2010. He was highlighting things. That's when I knew something was coming. Because Arthur doesn't make noise. He makes records. Every integration he ever touched was archived, time-stamped, and mirrored in 2 secure clouds. And that contract? The one he pulled up? That was from his original hire, when the company was still struggling to land Series B and his code literally kept the servers from setting themselves on fire. Back then, they offered him ownership stakes and sweeteners to keep him from jumping to Cisco. I know because I was there. And Arthur? Arthur never forgot a single clause. Carson, though, he didn't even know Arthur existed until that week. And by the time he did, well, let's just say you can't run a pitch off someone else's foundation and expect the foundation to stay quiet forever. I was 2 chairs down when it happened. Carson was reviewing internal applications for the integration lead role, right there in the open, like it was American Idol auditions and he was Simon Cowell. The room was full. Consultants, junior devs, one guy from PMO who never blinked. Arthur had submitted his interest formally, even attached a meticulous roadmap mapping existing modules to the buyer's tech stack. A gift, really. But Carson didn't even glance at it, just clicked the PDF, smirked, then spun his laptop around like he was unveiling a meme. This, he said, jabbing at the screen, is exactly the problem. Old school systems thinking. Every box here is a bottleneck waiting to happen. No one said a word. Carson leaned back in his chair, laced his fingers behind his head like a middle school bully who just dunked on the shy kid. You know what his proposed integration layer is built on? He asked, tone gleeful. Custom middleware with redundant logging. Redundant. This isn't 2008. I don't care who you are. You're not the future. He said that last part louder, like he wanted it to echo, like he wanted Arthur to hear it. Arthur was sitting near the coffee bar, thumbing through his moleskin, pretending not to listen. But I saw his jaw tick, just once. No retort, No eye stare, nothing performative. He closed the notebook, slid it into his bag, and left without spilling his coffee. Carson went right back to trashing other applicants like he was auditioning for a Netflix villain role. Later that day, I saw Arthur in the parking lot. He was standing by his car, not in it, just leaning against the passenger door with his phone in one hand and an old USB-C drive in the other. I only noticed because he dropped it, cursed, then picked it up and immediately started transferring files. Not panicked, deliberate, like he'd done this before. I went back inside and checked the internal HR portal. Arthur's application was already marked closed, not selected. Time-stamped 15 minutes after that meeting. No feedback, no comments, just closed. But something didn't add up. I checked the logs later that night, don't ask how, and found that Arthur had pulled several documents from our cold archive servers. Some were labeled founding contracts. Others were tagged under legal hold legacy folders from the pre-merger days, stuff I hadn't seen touched in years. He downloaded exactly 7 files. No more, no less. And just like that, I realized Arthur didn't leave that room defeated. He left recalibrating. Adjusting something internal like an old Swiss watch winding back into sync. Carson thought he embarrassed a dinosaur. But dinosaurs don't vanish because they're old. They vanish because the world shifts around them, and Arthur had just felt a tremor. The next day, Carson swaggered into work with a new prototype deck and a $14 latte, bragging that he was redefining the architecture from the studs up. I watched Arthur walk past him without making eye contact. Just a slight nod to me as he passed, holding a legal envelope marked private, client work product. I never saw that label used internally before. He knew something. Hell, he probably wrote something. Carson thought he was burying Arthur in irrelevance. Arthur, from what I could tell, was quietly digging up something that had never been dead to begin with. Arthur doesn't storm out, he doesn't rant, he doesn't even flinch. That's not his style. Instead, he disappears for exactly 1 hour the next morning, his desk phone idle, laptop lid down, no out-of-office reply. Just a man-shaped silence in the corner of our open floor plan. When he returned, something had changed. His walk was the same, his posture still that half-shrugged hunch he carried like an old coat, but there was a weight behind his eyes. I caught it when he passed the kitchenette, like something slow and heavy had locked into place behind his stare. I found out later where he'd gone. 13 years ago, Arthur joined this company when we were still scraping together Series B funding and calling ourselves a data orchestration service, which meant nothing then, and somehow even less now. The CTO at the time, Elias Holt, was brilliant but paranoid. They didn't trust cloud IP contracts or boilerplate clauses, so every engineer on the founding architecture team got custom paper contracts, wet ink signed, filed by hand in the now abandoned off-site storage facility in Newark. And Arthur? Arthur kept a copy. It wasn't even scanned. He'd laminated the damn thing himself. His original contract, dated July 3rd, 2012, outlined his terms in tight, lawyerly prose. Page 7, buried in a subsection of a subsection, was a clause titled Transfer Authority, Legacy Assignee Holdings. I read it myself, later. The language was dry but devastating. In perpetuity, no third-party licensing, platform sale, or functional derivative transfer of the core orchestration stack may be executed without written assent from the named assignee, Arthur Mason, unless such rights are formally and contractually waived under Section 9D of this agreement. Section 9D was blank. The waiver had never been filed. Let that sink in. Arthur didn't own the company. He didn't own shares. He didn't even hold a title higher than Staff Architect 2. But he was the legal gatekeeper to the most critical piece of software infrastructure we had. Not symbolically, not emotionally, legally. And Carson? Carson was marching toward a $495 million integration deal, bragging about cloud-native replacements and open core composability, while building it all on Arthur's stack. Without Arthur's signature, none of it was going anywhere. Arthur sent the clause, scanned clean with metadata, to his personal lawyer. The reply came in under 5 minutes. Still enforceable, don't say a word until they trip. That's when Arthur began the second phase. Not saboteur, not whistleblower, archivist. He didn't warn anyone, didn't throw flags. He just started preparing. First, he restructured his cloud drive, moving everything into mirrored folders with time-stamped hashes. Then he created a fresh email alias, his middle initial added, used only once to send a single message to an external compliance consultant we'd worked with years ago. The subject line read, "Confirming legacy compliance structure, Mason agreement." No follow-up. The next day, I saw him at the printer watching a 30-page document spool out. Legal headers, red pen notes in the margins, the kind of thing only someone who's both furious and forensic could generate. I asked what it was. He said flatly, "My insurance policy." He didn't mean it metaphorically. At lunch, Carson strutted through the cafe with one of the consultants, laughing loudly about how he was gutting the sacred cows of our code base. I glanced at Arthur. He was sitting in the corner, eating cottage cheese and pineapple, calmly highlighting a paper copy of our current MSA with the acquiring firm. Section 11.4.3, I think. Rights of assignment. No one noticed but me. But I'll tell you this. There's a particular kind of quiet that only comes when someone's already made the kill shot. They're just waiting for the target to step into it. Arthur wasn't angry. He was ready. The first rehearsal started with a fog machine. Not metaphorically. Carson actually ordered a portable fog machine to add cinematic gravitas to the pitch stage he set up in Conference Room B. 2 folding tables pushed together, LED lights under the table lip, 1 massive screen for his vision deck, and a Spotify playlist full of corporate synthwave. I wish I were making that up. He brought in 3 junior engineers, 2 contract consultants, and 1 former college roommate who apparently now specialized in scaling distributed APIs, but couldn't explain the difference between a monolith and a middleware proxy when asked. They gathered like disciples at a startup sermon, whiteboards ready, ego fully inflated. Carson slapped architectural diagrams on the screen that looked like Arthur's blueprints, just stripped of every safeguard and comment that made them functional. "See this?" Carson crowed, circling a node labeled Session Merge Engine 2.0. "Legacy guy thought we needed a separate instance for each tenant group. That's wasted compute. We merge it all here. Simplify the logic." I nearly choked. That node? Arthur invented it. The naming convention, the buffering logic, the tenant cache flush algorithm, they were his. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a foundational design constraint. Rip it out and you compromise the whole thing. Arthur sat in the back of the room, tapping notes into a notepad like a courtroom stenographer. Calm, surgical, not a trace of emotion on his face. But I saw the way he titled the page when he leaned it slightly toward the overhead light. Derivative misuse. Day 1. Over the next week, he logged everything. Every whiteboard scribble, every repo commit made by the new team that included code fragments lifted wholesale from his original work. He didn't challenge them, didn't correct the consultant who bragged about optimizing legacy middleware by copying the exact memory leak fix Arthur had patched 3 years ago. He just saved it all, screenshots, timestamps, metadata exports. I watched him plug a small hardware key into his laptop one night after hours. Air-gapped storage. He encrypted the entire archive, labeled it Client Derivative Audit, trigger pending. Meanwhile, Carson kept polishing his pitch like it was the climax of a TEDx talk. He rebranded Arthur's entire stack as the Adaptive Layer Engine, or ALE, which I guess sounded sexier than Modular Core Bridge with fallback sync. He even rehearsed the final line in the mirror. "We didn't just inherit a system, we evolved it." Arthur didn't flinch. He just printed out Carson's slides and started marking each one with color-coded tabs. Original design, altered logic, unlicensed derivative, misattributed function. He filed them in a blue binder labeled Integration Rebrand, unauthorized modifications. On Thursday, Carson brought in a production assistant to film a mock pitch for internal stakeholder morale. He posed like he was landing a moon mission. And again, right there on slide 15, was Arthur's signature load balancer schema, rotated 90 degrees and rebranded as Next-Gen Stream Link Grid. I saw Arthur watching from outside the glass. He didn't say a word, just turned, walked to the print server, and ran a new job labeled Witness Packet B. He had already prepared Packet A. This one was for escalation. I asked him, quietly, off to the side, why he hadn't gone to legal yet. He stared at the hallway carpet like it was answering for the entire company. "You don't interrupt a man mid-free fall," he said. "You wait for the silence after the snap." I didn't understand what that meant until much later. Carson wasn't building a system. He was building a performance on a system someone else had already designed. But the thing about architecture, real architecture, is that it remembers its maker, not with credit, with fingerprints. And Arthur had started lifting every single one. It started with a subject line so bland it could have been a spam filter casualty. Quick Q re assignee waivers. The message was sent from a throwaway Gmail address that hadn't been used in over a year. No name, no signature. Just one question, sent directly to Sadie Lang from legal, an internal paralegal known for three things: being chronically overcaffeinated, loyal to no one but precedent, and having once corrected a VP on indemnity language mid-call without blinking. Arthur knew exactly who he was writing to. The body of the email was simple. Hey, curious if the current integration deal includes any assignee of record waivers re core stack components? Just want to make sure everything's clean before it gets locked. THX. Sadie replied in under 8 minutes. No waivers filed. Haven't seen any language around assignee rights. Is this for a specific module? Deal room is finalizing next week. That was all Arthur needed. He logged off for precisely 12 minutes. When he came back, he walked straight to his desk, opened a folder labeled Compliance Cold, and pulled out one document: a scanned copy of his 2012 contract with the Transfer Authority Legacy Assignee Holdings clause highlighted in yellow. At the top, he wrote one sentence in blue ink: Clause 7D, not executed. No waiver filed, retains authority. Then he scanned the page again, this time embedding metadata with a location stamp and a date chain linked to the original archive hash. I saw him do it. Watched as he renamed the file Mason Clause Validation Final PDF and dragged it into a folder titled Trigger Vault. 5 minutes later, a new email left his inbox, not to legal, not to Carson, but to himself. Company email address from his private account. Subject: Legacy Clause Confirmation. Transfer Halt. FY25 Acquisition. Attachment: the clause file, fully time-stamped. He CC'd his own manager, the general project inbox, and archived the thread with a digital read receipt request. He didn't say a word about it, didn't reference it in meetings, didn't correct Carson when he continued rehearsing phrases like full platform license transfer or end-to-end IP handoff. Just watched, waited. By Monday, Arthur had moved on to the next step. He opened a new spreadsheet. The tabs weren't named to-do or risks or notes. They were labeled Notice Window, Trigger Escrow, and Witness Path. Under Notice Window, he listed 3 dates: today's, the buyer's scheduled pitch, and something labeled Pull Deadline, Clause Enforcement. Next to each, he'd written initials. Sadie's was there, mine too. He was building a chain of custody, not for a product, for authority. When I finally asked him, after hours when the office was just buzzing with vending machine hum and half-dead fluorescent lights, what happens if they sign without the waiver? He didn't blink. They can't, he said. The architecture isn't theirs to give. I'm not blocking them. I'm protecting what exists. I asked if he was going to warn them. He looked down at his mug, black coffee, always cold by then, and said, I've already filed the warning. It's time-stamped. If they ignore it, it's willful breach. Not my fire, just my extinguisher. I didn't sleep that night, because I knew that once legal caught up, once that clause made it to someone with decision-making authority, the entire acquisition train would skid sideways. Carson had been building momentum, but all of it rested on borrowed ground. Arthur didn't shout, he didn't sabotage, he just laid the tripwire, marked it clearly, and stepped back. The boardroom smelled like new leather and panic perfume. Everything was white glove. Polished glass table, bottled water with monogrammed labels, minimalist floral centerpiece like a tech startup's idea of class. Carson walked in like he owned air, adjusting his sport coat, nodding at the buyers like they were lucky to be in the room. He carried a single folder and his iPad, cocky as hell. Arthur walked in 6 minutes later. No fanfare, no formal intro. Just nodded to the assistant at the door and took a seat near the back, second chair from the left. He placed a black notebook on the table, uncapped a pen, and pulled out his phone, thumb hovering just above the screen. No laptop, no badge lanyard. To someone outside the loop, he looked like an admin who wandered into the wrong room. Carson didn't even glance at him. Thank you all for being here, he started, clicking to his first slide. As you'll see, our core adaptive architecture is built with forward compatibility in mind. No legacy baggage, no redundant control layers, just modular precision and full license readiness for immediate cross-platform deployment. The buyers nodded, flipping through printed decks, eyes trained on the diagrams. Arthur didn't move. Slide 6. Carson went in deeper. Our session merge engine streamlines tenant data pools via a single rebalanced node, eliminating the need for costly fallback paths. Our team, he gestured vaguely toward the consultants, has rebuilt these systems from the ground up using scalable open core principles. Arthur blinked. He opened his phone. One tap brought up the legal thread. The clause file, Sadie's confused reply, the read receipts, the time-stamped self-email from 2 weeks ago, the paralegal's metadata log. He scrolled once, confirmed the header was intact, then forwarded it, quietly, without eye contact, to the company's outside counsel, Mitchell Rains. Subject, IP transfer violation risk, assignee not waived. He locked the screen, set the phone down, and wrote one note in his black notebook, 7D, executed via silence. Mitchell opened the email 3 minutes later. I know because I saw his eyes change. 1 second, he was halfway through nodding at Carson's licensing overview. The next, he was squinting at his screen, jaw clenched. He leaned toward the CEO and whispered something. The CEO stiffened. Carson kept talking. Slide 10 here outlines the full stack handoff to your systems team. As you can see, all backend operations will flow through what we're calling the Adaptive Layer Engine, or ALE, which is fully transferable under our current enterprise MSA. Excuse me, Mitchell said. Carson paused, blinked. Yes? Before we proceed, Mitchell said, voice low but firm, can you confirm who holds assignee of record status for the core orchestration stack? The room froze. Carson's mouth opened, but nothing came out. His eyes darted to the consultants, then to legal, then back. We integrated it into... I asked, Mitchell said, cutting cleanly, who holds assignee of record? Arthur raised his hand. Calm, no gloating, just raised it, palm out, like a man answering attendance in grade school. Mitchell turned to the buyers. We'll need to pause here. There appears to be an outstanding contractual clause that voids any transfer of core IP without this individual's written consent. Gasps weren't audible, but you could feel them. Carson looked like someone had unplugged his spine. He doesn't even work on the current platform team. He does now, the CEO snapped. The lead buyer frowned. So this hasn't been waived? The assignee wasn't even listed? No waiver filed, Mitchell confirmed, reading off the screen. No consent given. Clause 7D still binding. This entire section of the deal is invalid without his approval. Carson turned to Arthur. Finally, really saw him. Arthur didn't blink. He didn't smile. He just pulled a single sheet from his folder and slid it across the table to the CEO. It was a printed copy of the clause with his initials at the bottom and a sticky note that said, "For your records." He didn't say a word, because he didn't need to. The air in that room turned heavier than lead. Mitchell's eyes were still glued to Arthur's forwarded email, his screen casting a cold blue glare across his face as he scrolled. Twice, then once more. The attachments, the timestamps, the metadata trail, the digital read receipts, the lack of a waiver. It was all there, not even buried. Just ignored, forgotten, like Arthur himself. Mitchell leaned toward the CEO, voice low and urgent. We need to halt. Now. The CEO's head snapped up so fast his glasses slid halfway down his nose. What? I'm serious, Mitchell said. If this isn't paused immediately, we're looking at material misrepresentation. He's got assignee authority. Not theoretical, active, no waiver, no override. The room went still. Across the table, one of the buyers furrowed her brow and tilted her head. I'm sorry. What's going on? Carson stepped forward, smile a shade too wide. It's nothing serious. Probably just some legacy paperwork noise. We've modernized... Mitchell cut him off like a buzzsaw. It's not noise, it's a binding clause, and it's enforceable. I was sitting just behind Arthur, and I watched as he opened his notebook and calmly checked off a box labeled Transfer Intercept. Executed. Carson's face flushed a deep, raw red. Wait, what clause? What are you even... The buyer's counsel, older guy, wire-rimmed glasses, not easily rattled, looked up slowly from his packet, his tone surgical. Who, he asked, is the assignee of record for the back-end orchestration architecture? No one answered. Arthur didn't rush. He didn't gloat. He just raised his hand, palm up, elbow steady, like he was volunteering to take the fall, even though we all knew he was the one holding the net. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was annihilating. You could practically hear the zeros evaporating from the pitch valuation. One consultant coughed. The youngest engineer stared at the table like he could phase through it. And Carson? Carson looked like someone had just whispered that the brakes were out on a moving train. The CEO turned to Arthur, expression unreadable. Is this accurate? Arthur nodded once, then pulled a printed copy of his original contract from his folder again and slid it down the table toward him. Page 7, he said. First words he'd spoken all meeting. His voice was dry as a filing cabinet. Clause 7D, never waived, never reassigned. Still active, still mine. Carson lunged. We built the entire ALE framework on that stack. This was already integrated. Arthur didn't look at him, just sipped his water, then placed the glass neatly back on its coaster. I know, he said. One sentence. That's it. Not angry, not smug, just confirmation. Because this wasn't about revenge. This was about accuracy. The buyers began flipping through their packets. Legal teams whispered. One of them started highlighting entire paragraphs. Carson tried to explain, to pivot, to reassure, but his voice was unraveling. He had no idea what the clause even was, let alone how to spin around it. Mitchell finally leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and looked at Arthur with something like respect. Why didn't you come forward earlier? He asked. Arthur turned slightly, just enough to make eye contact. I did, he said. Check your inbox. 2 weeks ago. The buyer's counsel opened his phone, his face drained, and that's when it hit me. Arthur had never hidden anything. He hadn't plotted a takedown. He'd done exactly what the contract required. He had documented, disclosed, and waited. It wasn't his fault no one read what he sent. Cold satisfaction settled into the room like a storm that had already passed. The damage wasn't loud, but it was absolute. Carson had built an empire on someone else's foundation without ever checking the bedrock. And now that foundation had raised its hand and said, "That's mine." No anger, no vengeance. Just the sound of leverage being acknowledged and power returning to its original address. Carson didn't go quietly. Men like him never do. Within 15 minutes of the room cracking open from Arthur's raised hand, Carson started spinning. There has to be a waiver on file. He's been here for over a decade. There's no way he hasn't relinquished rights through internal systems. Everyone clicks through the updates. They're embedded in the tool chain now. Mitchell didn't even bother replying at first. He just pulled out a tablet, tapped 3 times, and turned it around to show the room. It displayed a list of signed amendments. Arthur's name wasn't on a single one. No click wraps, no explicit reassignment, no Section 9D override executed, Mitchell said. Then the hammer, which means Clause 7D is still binding, and you've used his code, name, and logic in every slide deck we've shown the buyers. The lead buyer leaned back in her chair, arms folded. We'll need to postpone due diligence until this is sorted. I'd like formal confirmation of IP licensing rights and transfer authority before our legal team moves forward. In other words, the $495 million deal was now in limbo. One man had silently frozen it mid-flight. The CEO's jaw clenched so tight I thought his molars might snap. He turned to Arthur. What do you want? Arthur didn't hesitate. I want formal equity participation, retroactive credit for derivative use, and a permanent licensing royalty tied to all future deployments of the orchestration layer. 10-year term minimum. And a title change. No ceremony needed, just accuracy. His voice didn't rise. He didn't flex. It was just policy. And he said it all while flipping calmly to a tab in his notebook labeled Post-Trigger Terms. Carson exploded. This is extortion, he shouted, rising halfway from his seat. We've modernized everything. You can't just insert yourself into this deal because you hung around long enough to find an old contract. Mitchell raised a hand. Sit down. Carson froze. Mitchell turned to the CEO. Legally speaking, Mr. Mason's rights are not only valid, they're foundational. You built on his architecture. You presented it as yours. You tied the licensing to code that is bound by a clause you never nullified. This isn't insertion, it's restoration. Arthur said nothing, just slid a printed draft of his requested terms down the table. No logo, just text. Clean, precise, inevitable. The CEO took the document, skimmed it, then signaled to his assistant. Carson, you're off the deal. Effective immediately. HR will contact you about transition logistics. Carson's face drained. You're firing me? No, the CEO said, not looking at him. I'm putting you under internal transition review. You'll be contacted by governance and compliance. Don't speak to the buyers, don't speak to legal, don't speak to Arthur. He didn't say, "Don't speak to me," but the silence after said it loud enough. Carson stood there for a second, processing the collapse. His empire, the meetings, the whiteboards, the consultants, the sizzle reels was gone. Because he'd treated the foundation like scenery. Because he'd never once stopped to ask, who built this? And Arthur? He gathered his folder. Didn't rush, didn't gloat, just tucked everything into his bag, clicked the clasp, and stood. As he passed the buyer's counsel, he offered a small nod. "When you're ready to talk real terms, I'll be available." The buyer smiled. "We'll be in touch." It wasn't revenge, it wasn't triumph, it was correction. The deal hadn't died. It had just been handed back to the person it never should have moved without. And Carson? He sat back down, hollow-eyed, staring at the chair Arthur had just vacated like it might still give him another chance. But there are no second chances when the code owns you, and the coder remembers. 2 weeks later, the new agreement was signed. There was no press release, no champagne in the kitchen, just a short, unceremonious email from legal with the subject line, "Fully executed, FY25 Platform Licensing Agreement." Attached was the revised PDF, 42 pages long, dry, impeccable. And right there, beneath the signatures of the CEO, the lead buyer, and both legal counsels, were 3 new titles typed in bold under the Integration Authority section: Lead Architect, IP Assignee, Legacy Integration Officer, Arthur Mason. He didn't throw a party. Didn't send a celebratory all-hands note. He just took his coffee like always, black, room temp, and returned to his desk, where a new nameplate sat in silence. The only change was the chair. He'd swapped his old one for a newer model with better lumbar support. That, and the fact that every time Carson's name used to appear in the portal, on slides, org charts, project trackers, it was now gone. No farewell email, no all-staff goodbye. Just one day, internal transition review. The next, access revoked. The rumor mill tried to make sense of it, of course. Some said Carson got poached by a competitor. Others claimed he left to pursue new ventures. But we knew. Those of us who were in the room. Those of us who had watched a man walk into the fire with a contract instead of a torch. The buyers moved forward cautiously. They came back, not with swagger, but with respect. They looped Arthur into every call, laughed at his dry jokes, asked for clarifications on code blocks he hadn't touched in years, and listened when he said, "Don't rebuild that. It's still smarter than you are." They offered him a spotlight, a keynote at the merger announcement, a video tribute to the visionary behind the engine. He declined, said it felt like putting a hat on a hammer, said systems weren't built for applause. They were built to hold. Instead, he sent one email, just one. It went to the CEO, legal, and the buyer's counsel. The subject line was blank. The body was a single sentence. For future reference, know who built the damn system. Then he archived the thread and turned off his monitor. I saw him that evening. Elevator lobby just after 6. The floor was quiet, lights dimmed by the automated timer. He stood alone, bag slung over one shoulder, phone in hand. A dozen unread notifications blinked across the screen. Some Slack pings, a few emails, one text from Mitchell just saying nicely done. Arthur didn't check any of them. The elevator dinged. Doors opened. He stepped inside without a word. The last thing I saw before the door slid shut was his reflection in the brushed steel. Calm, still, unreadable. No anger, no ego, just a man who never forgot the paperwork. And made sure this time no one else did either.